fiction is actually very similar to philosophy because it is basically us exploring the bounds of the possible. The moral saint is boring because she does everything to be good, but she isn't a person anymore. I feel the finitude of it makes it all the more urgent. You just go through the motions, right? You go to breakfast, you go to school. But I thought, look, I can try to make something more of my life.
Hi, I'm Chelsea, and I'm here with my co-host, philosopher Kelly Weirich.
I'm Kelly, and I'm here with my co-host, philosopher Chelsea Haramia. And you're here with Storyfy, a podcast about storytellers, story lovers, and philosophy.
Today's story sails us beyond this life to an island located somewhere else. So, put on your life jacket, set your course for eternity, and if you've still got time after that, stick around as we chat about philosophical themes with the author, Helen De Cruz.
The Diamond Mountain by Helen De Cruz. Bardo is a charming coastal town, with its lighthouse and market and winding cobblestone streets, but you have to see it properly. I didn't when I arrived. Like you, I came on a boat, a fishing sloop, in a large and sundry fleet that cast its lights in the black bay. I reached the shore on unsteady legs. I don't remember when. At first I felt disoriented. How could I live in this unlivable place? The sky is a starless void. The lighthouse casts its beam into the sea as the steady stream of ships with new inhabitants arrive. There's no way to mark the time in Bardo. No years, no seasons, no nights and days. Nothing except for a fish and vegetable market that is held regularly. One day, as I sat in my dilapidated apartment, eating a lunch of bland, steamed cod I bought at the market, I hit my lowest point. In the clarity that only despair affords, I realized I'm in hell. A further thought struck me. What did I do to deserve hell? Memories of my life have become a meaningless blur. Some days I can barely remember my first name, Masashi. My skin fits tightly on muscular arms. What's the point of being a young man in a place like this? A fairy tale tells of a mountain made entirely of diamond, tall like Mount Fuji, and a little bird that flies by it and sharpens its beak on the summit once every 100 years. When the entire mountain is worn away, 1 second of eternity has passed. Hell isn't torment, it's boredom. Yet one day, as I strolled on the beach, watching the combers glisten in the lighthouse's roving beam, I thought of a running gag my wife and I used to have, an imaginary dog we called Choco. Landlords never allowed us to keep pets. At that moment, a large dog ran up to me, an Irish setter. The dog stood panting with that earnest, silly enthusiasm only dogs can muster. I took a piece of driftwood and threw it. He ran and brought it back. "Choco?" I asked. He barked and wagged his tail. My imaginary dog had become real. The sky was still pitch dark, my apartment still a shithole, but with Choco by my side, it felt almost bearable. We walked to the market. I'd buy fish for him and carefully pick out the bones, as dogs can choke on fish bones just like humans can. I wasn't sure if a figment of my imagination could die. I didn't want to take the chance. I pondered, and stars lit up the black expanse. My knowledge of astronomy has always been sketchy. After I thought about stars for a while, the Big Dipper's solemn shape appeared. Next, Pegasus's gloomy square swung itself above the sea's horizon. And then came the Little Dipper, with its North Star fixed like a precious jewel. More stars were flung back from the recesses of my memory into the world. I probably got most constellations wrong. It doesn't matter. Finally, I made the sun illuminate the darkness, coaxing a pink and frosty dawn at the horizon when I took Choco for a walk. That same day, I met you on the beach. You disembarked from a schooner, disoriented and confused. You appeared as a young woman, with black smooth hair tied in 2 braids, but I could tell that, like me, you had a long life of experience that even the fog of Bardo's ever-present cannot erase. But unlike me, your memories of your past life were sharp and brimming with experience. You dreaded the thought of spending eternity here. This afterlife, you said, is not worth living. Just try. You can choose to see things how you want. You too can see a pretty coastal town with a lighthouse and a market if you want to. I gestured around to help you see Bardo's many charms. I added, the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. Milton wrote that. You remarked, those lines were said by Satan in Paradise Lost. So what? It's still true, I retorted. I refuse this self-deception, you said. Objectively speaking, you're just as miserable as me. That dog you keep on mentioning isn't even real. If it were, I would see it too. Chaco flickered ominously. I took a few deep breaths and regained my calm. He became solid again. You are wrong. Try again. Just focus. There's a large Irish setter sitting next to me, on his haunches. He's sniffing your hand right now. You looked doubtful. I pressed on. Look, Eureka, if you don't like it, you can always go back to how you felt before. I ought not to have promised you that. A promise I could not keep. You did hold out your hand to Chaco there and then. And now you too can see my rosy-fingered dawn. You too can smell the rich vapors of seaweed soup emanating from large bronze cauldrons in the market. You and I live in my apartment now, which has morphed from a cramped 1-bedroom into a nest of coziness. The bed is no longer an iron frame, but made of delicate wooden joinery, our bedspread festooned with gay and colorful birds. We're taking pottery classes. We practice several styles of martial art in a dojo you conjured up. I finally learned to cook. Next, I will learn how to sail. In this happy state, in the charming coastal town of Bardo, hundreds of years have elapsed. Our bedroom window affords a panoramic vista of the Diamond Mountain, glistening in the lazy afternoon sun. The bird has not even worn away a millimeter of it.
We're joined today by the author of The Diamond Mountain. They are a philosophy professor whose fiction has appeared in Escape Pod, Hyphen Punk, and Kaleidotrope. Together with Eric Schwitzgebel and Johann de Smet, they are co-editor of the anthology Philosophy Through Science Fiction Stories. In their spare time, they play the Renaissance lute and archlute, write fiction, draw, and paint. Today, it's the Danforth Chair in the Humanities at St. Louis University, Dr. Helen De Cruz. Welcome, Helen.
Hi, thank you for hosting me.
We're really happy to have you here today, and we'd like to start off by offering you a choice of 3 big questions. First, what did you write? Second, where did you write? Or third, who did you write?
I think that this is a very conceptual story. The story is basically dealing with an old philosophical question that is most recognizably posed by Bernard Williams. Namely, even if the afterlife is as good as you can want it and as great as you can find it, would you eventually get bored because it keeps on going? And the image of the Diamond Mountain is a very beautiful image, but it comes from an old Grimm story. So that actually was the basis of this story. There's lots of Grimm stories that we all know, like Red Riding Hood and Cinderella and things like that. But this is a fairly unknown Grimm story. It's called The Shepherd Boy, where the shepherd boy is asked by the king all sorts of difficult questions, like how big is the starry sky, how many stars are there, and that sort of thing. And he gives all these wise answers to the king. And then the king asks, yeah, sorry, that's my clock, but that's not an issue, right? So, yeah.
It's kind of
so
nice.
then it's kind of nice, yeah. So, but then the king asks him, what is eternity like? And it's very hard for us to conceptualize. We are finite creatures, as we all know. So this image of a diamond, a very hard material thing, mountain, huge, where very rarely you have this erosion of one little beak sharpening. But eventually it is going to be worn away. It just takes unimaginably long. And even then you haven't made a dent in eternity. I thought was such a beautiful image. I thought that story needs to be retold. And so I retold it in this specific form.
It is a beautiful image. I think when we think of the afterlife, we're kind of thinking not only what is a good life, but what does it mean to be human?
That's right, yeah.
There's a kind of question, how can I be perfect and yet be me? Or how can I continue on without the kinds of struggle and striving that we experience and maybe even identify with being human, this kind of unfinished aspect. I was interested with how you brought this idea of being unfinished into the afterlife in Bardo. There's still more to do. Could you speak to that?
Yeah, Bardo is interestingly, it's the Buddhist hell, basically. It's a kind of purgatory. So it's not like the end state, and you can wonder, is this where Masashi is going to end up forever or not? So that's already a question. And the fact indeed that he hardly has any connection to his previous life, whereas his new, partner, Yuriko, does have this connection to her past life, to her actual life when she was alive like you and me. And that does give them a different perspective. She does go along with him because I don't see what other choice you have than to make the best of it. So trying to make the best of it, and then you can think like what you all want to do. I would like to sail. I would like to learn martial arts. And there are afterlife views where you keep on getting new projects, and that makes your life interesting, and you could go on forever. Notably, John Martin Fisher, he worked a lot on afterlife. He thinks that it's not a problem, that Bernard Williams' idea for the immortality is not an issue, because you can always make new projects. And that's sort of what I'm intimating at, but then the final sentence is that there's not even 1 millimeter gone. So it's going to be unimaginably long in a way that we just can't comprehend. We make an afterlife in our minds, but we don't fill out all the details. We don't look at all the consequences because we just cannot imagine on our human scale what it would entail to live forever.
It reminds me of some of the themes that come up when I do work in outer space ethics or just the philosophy of outer space, because Carl Sagan has this famous line with the pale blue dot image where the Voyager spacecraft turned around near one of Saturn's moons, I think, and took this picture of Earth from really far away. And it was this really lucky moment that it happened to be a mote of dust suspending on the sunbeam, he says. He comments on how the entire planet looks like a speck, let alone your business being a speck on that speck. When you start to think cosmically, you think in these really, really expansive ways. And then when you start to think about human life, it just narrows so much. And so the cosmos are not eternal according to our best science, but you have to think in these diamond mountain ways. You see stuff, it seems like it's going to take forever to change, but it will. And so there is a progression in your eternity. If there's long enough, that mountain will be gone. So this idea of progression with this idea of eternity, how is that working in your mind as the storyteller?
Yeah, I feel so ambivalent about it. I always have several things coming in my mind. I had a Grimm story, but I also had other ideas about how can we conceive of eternity, and also I called this to myself my dark Kiki's Delivery Story. It's such a beautiful island, and I wanted to make it Japanese as well, with the cauldrons, etc. I want to evoke something atmospheric, so it's not that you're in a void. You can still fill in a lot. And then one thing I was very inspired by is Indian philosophy, namely Yogacara. There's a lot of Buddhist influence in the story, not only in the fact that the place is called Bardo, which should alert you that it's not really heaven. Bardo is literally a Buddhist hell. And maybe they're not aware that they're just trapped in hell, or maybe they can sort of make it into a heaven, as Milton says. Because that's a fundamental concept of Yogacara, is that your mind interprets the world as if it's horrible or as if it's wonderful. And I see that, so for the listeners, basically, I'm in hospice care. I don't have long to live. And I could think of this two ways. I was railing against it first. I was very angry because, all the books I couldn't write and my kids. But on the other hand, I haven't had a bad life. I've had a good life, good marriage, a good career. So yeah, you can see things two ways. Some things are just unambiguously horrible, right? Like warfare and whatnot. But in many things, you have some choice, some agency. And that is sort of the little bit of hope that is provided, that you can always have that agency and to sort of not be miserable. I mean, some people, they have everything, and yet they're so miserable. And in part, Yogacara would say, you have to train your mind and see, is it really so dreadful? And I'm not saying that this is sort of like positive thinking or something like that, but just try to evaluate the situation and see how many ways you can fill it out. So that was another inspiration source.
Yeah, I will admit that for a story about the afterlife, a lot of it reminded me of just regular old living,
Yeah, that's right.
There's a sense in which the afterlife in Bardo has made each person a little creator, and I find that idea fascinating. Coming from a Christian perspective, I think creativity is kind of the image of God that we bear. We're making things all the time, fashioning the world, speaking things into being, building relationships and theories and kids and cathedrals. This creativity is made forefront in Bardo in a way that I really appreciate. It's really up to them what they do and even what they see in the world.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking, how would that work? Like, he doesn't know constellations all that well. What if somebody comes along who does know them better? Like, I would sort of say, oh my God, this is all wrong. The Big Dipper is in the wrong place. And, so that would be funny, because it is a shared reality. Like, the dog is not just his dog, although Yuriko needs to make some effort to see the dog. So I don't know, that's a nice thing with a 1,000 word story. You don't need to have figured everything out about how it works. But that is kind of interesting, right? That you could sort of build that reality in a way that we can't quite hear. But a little bit we can, right? We do make a reality.
It would be much more hellish to me if it were only I able to create and there was no co-creating involved, because so often what sparks inspiration for me creatively is the external world and other people, right? Like actual things that exist outside of me, or things that some people have started. So yeah, it does seem much more hellish if it were just like, you have the freedom to create whatever you want, but it's only you and only your mind and only your imagination. It does seem less terrible when Unico, when she arrives, right?
Yeah, it seems less terrible, and I also put her in there because otherwise I thought this is so surely hell. If there is an afterlife, you want to be in communion with people that you maybe haven't seen in a while and that you would like to see again, people who have preceded you. So I think that is very important. My idea of hell is that you just end up all alone with your own thoughts, and that is just such a terrible idea. I read a science fiction novel Like, honestly, I forgot who wrote it, but it's one of those classical guys, Clark or something. But I shouldn't have read it because basically it's about that the dead are just stuck all by themselves in their own thoughts. And what they then do is then at some point they try to grab the bodies of the living so that they can have a little bit more time not in this horrible state. And I thought, yeah, I should not have read that story because it's just a nightmare, that idea that you're there all alone. Yeah.
Solitary confinement is proven to be just pure torture, right? We know that, even though literally nothing is happening to you. Yeah.
It's like that. So I thought at least if I give him a partner, then it'll be less terrible. Like I think you can face a lot together. And the fact that she makes those dojos, I think is quite fun. Several dojos. It's have time, right? So in some respects, it's a bit of a sort of strange story. At some point, you can look at this and you can say, "Yeah, this is really great. You live on this beautiful island, and you can do all the things that you've put off. Like I can't bake cakes. Maybe I can learn to do it now and make really nice cakes and that sort of thing."
I love that idea of an afterlife where you keep learning and going. There's another aspect lingering here, and that's the idea of ephemerality. One aspect of the value of ephemerality is that it's a reminder of what's to come for us. Our lives are finite, and that connects us to the world around us that's always dying and being born. But I wonder, do we need that to provide meaning, or is there another kind of meaning we can have? And I also wonder if there's a kind of ephemerality that Masashi and Yoriko could make for themselves. You know, you imagine the flowers wilting in the vase or the fish, you know, the process of it getting cooked. I think maybe another way to say it is, do the characters have too much agency in the story? They can make anything happen, so they lose out on the ephemerality.
Yeah, definitely. Several philosophers have talked about this. Like, maybe if there is no afterlife, it's not a big problem because the ephemerality is what makes it so valuable. It's what makes our life urgent. Like, we wouldn't have the sense of urgency. Like, I certainly had the urgency. I've made a lot of things. I've written a lot of things and played a lot of things. And one of the reasons is that I feel the finitude of it makes it all the more urgent. When I was 9, I was in a near fatal car accident. And when I came to, I was just a child, but I thought I nearly died. But I have another chance, you know, I've just been sort of living. And it's interesting that a 9-year-old can have that thought. You just go through the motions, right? You go to eat breakfast, you go to school. But I thought, look, I can try to make something more of my life. And that's when I became really ambitious and thinking, I want to write and I want to reach people. At first I thought I want to be an artist, but you know, it's very hard to be an artist and survive. It's even harder than an academic. But certainly I've had this feeling that because life is finite and because you can be hit by a proverbial bus and that sort of almost happened to you, you can still make things valuable precisely because you don't have all the time, all the resources, because you don't have it all in your hands. You have to take it. You have to try to make it happen. And indeed, if I could just say, I want this, or Kaza, I want that, would that be so satisfying? I don't know. The struggle is sometimes good. And that would be gone in many accounts of the afterlife. There is no struggle. There's no tears in heaven. Is it a heaven if nobody ever cries? Right? Sometimes a good cry, you know. So I've been thinking about that.
Most people have that kind of time, whether they're 9 years old or 19 years old or maybe even 99 years old, where they're like, oh, there's stuff that really matters, and then there's all this other stuff I do, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Right.
and trauma, of course, is one way of really kind of facing that, often very suddenly. But there's stuff that's important to do in a very instrumental way, but then there's the stuff that really matters. And so you talked about like there's this sense of urgency to add value to the world. And so I wonder if you could say a bit more about your thoughts on what's the truly valuable stuff for those of us here.
Yeah, one thing I realized a while ago when I got ill, and maybe I realized it before, is I thought, why do you do things? Like, take the richest man on earth. The richest man on earth is not happy. Why is he not happy? Why does he keep on craving more? He can do literally anything. He could change so much, and you can see that he changes a lot. But basically, you can't take it with you. When he dies, what is his legacy? I think we will soon forget him. People like Warren Buffett and that sort of people, that's just Evil Gates, that's just names. So who are people that we remember? We remember somebody like Marie Curie, who comes from a very modest background, but who really revolutionized in so many ways, in medicine and other ways, a knowledge of polonium and other stuff. So we think that she did something valuable, and you can think of other people. It's not just people who have concrete things, but like say Van Gogh. He was just basically a very miserable man, but his paintings still bring so much joy. Every day, I was in a MoMA 2 years ago, and I stood staring at the starry night, and other people too, and it moves so many people. So basically, you can't take it with you, but you can leave things behind. And actually, you should focus on that. So I think many people have their priorities wrong. They gather wealth for themselves and their children. What is the point? And then they have a little bit of philanthropy. But rather than, there's a wing. The wing here in this university is devoted to this very rich guy. But what did he do? You want to be a Marie Curie and not a Bill Gates. So that's what you want to aim, and that's also what I've aimed to do. I think many of us try to make the world, to leave it a better place, and to leave things that bring other people joy.
You have and you do, Helen, and that's one reason I'm inspired by your public philosophy, your commitment to bringing these thoughts out of the ivory tower and into our lives, because philosophy is for everyone. And so the kinds of pursuits that you've made, I think, are a really fine model for philosophers.
I love that. Thank you. Thank you. That's very kind of you to say. What I like most is when I write something that brings something very difficult, obscure, and closed, and that makes it suddenly understandable. So, for example, Spinoza, you try to read the Ethics as a layperson, and some people do. They have not read anything else, and then they take on such a work. I find it very interesting that you often have lay people take a philosophy book that is like Being and Time. Let's read it, just cold like that, and I really admire that. But most people are not going to get much out of that. So what I really love is to try to convey to people who don't have the tools why this thought of Spinoza, for instance, is still so relevant, is still so inspiring. And, there are many people who do that, popularizing, like Stephen Nadler writes these books on Spinoza. But then the question is, you already have to be really bought in. So I think sometimes like a short piece on my Substack or just on a public philosophy venue like E01 or The Guardian helps people who would otherwise not even think about it. Just have a look. And I've had so many letters from people who say that they really learned something and they got insight and they got really into a philosopher thanks to some public philosophy that I wrote. And I find that's such a great compliment, and I really feel like I've done something. And I get so many letters of lay people, and that's really very rewarding.
Stories do this too, right?
Yeah.
It's a way of inviting people into an idea. I appreciate that in your work as well.
Yeah, that's right. Stories I've only done like the last, like it was basically pandemic lockdowns, and I thought I want to do something for myself. I want to do something for me because you lose yourself, right? You're working, you're trying to do online teaching. You've never done this before. Your kids are at home suddenly and not at school. So it was such a difficult period. But then I thought I've always wanted to write fiction. Like as a kid, I would write these books and then staple them together and make my own illustrations. But now I thought I can write. Then the question is, how can you write? I'm not going to write whole novels, although I know some philosophers, very, very admirable, who do even now write whole novels. I write mostly for magazines. Not all stories get accepted there. I just put one on my Substack recently that is a really fun sort of mystery. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Blessedness. And it's a short story completely structured around Spinoza's ethics. But it's also like a fun whodunit plus space opera romp, and it was so fun to write. Fiction is actually very similar to philosophy because it is basically us exploring the bounds of the possible. So when I had that edited volume with Eric Schwitzgebel and with Johan de Smet, we thought about what is speculative fiction, and even just non-speculative fiction. It's just looking like what could be, right? Philosophy, that's what Merleau-Ponty says, is that you sort of slacken the threads that sort of put you in everyday situations. And you slacken the threads, you don't go out of the world. It's not that philosophy is outer-worldly, but here are some possible different options we could have taken. Here are some possible different ideas. Here are some different societies, like we did utopias and things. And that's why there's so much similarity and why so many philosophers, I think, also wrote fiction. Bacon with his New Atlantis, so many philosophers. Sartre wrote fiction. So it's just like a very natural link, particularly with speculative fiction, but I think with all fiction.
Yeah. And the part of what we're here to learn more about in this podcast is who's out there today writing fiction.
Yeah.
But you mentioned the slackening threads of this way of doing philosophy through fiction, and it reminded me of Musashi from your story.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like he had to kind of loosen something up, and then he saw what he could do with his own mind. And that seems a little bit like this idea of using speculative fictions to explore philosophical ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. It's almost like it's in one plane of reality there, whereas here it's still quite separate. I'm not a Marxist or anything, but Marx says that philosophy should be lived, should be acted out, otherwise it's not real philosophy, or something like that. I forgot the quote. It is a very nice quote. And I think that that's right, that we often aren't aware of what we can all do, and I think philosophy helps us a lot with looking at what all those possibilities might be.
You quickly go back to something you mentioned before. You said when you started really getting into doing philosophy through fiction, it was during the pandemic. And these are some of the things that you've contributed, right? You can't take it with you, but you can leave things behind. And this is some of the amazing stuff that you will leave behind that I know so many of us are grateful for. But you said it was when you took a moment to focus on yourself. And so the stuff that you're doing that's so valuable to others, it's a direct result of self-focus, right? Or even like a kind of selfishness to be able to step away from worldly demands and think about what really matters to you. But what I love about that is, especially with people like you, what really matters to you is the kind of stuff that really matters to so many of us, and that is really, really beneficial. And so for the young philosophers out there, for non-philosophical listeners out there, what do you think about this relationship between maybe more self-centered, focusing on yourself, in the journey to leaving truly valuable stuff behind?
I'm inspired by Audre Lorde, the philosopher poet, and she has this very beautiful vision on it. So Audre Lorde, basically she says, look, if you don't want me as a poet, then you don't want me as an ally in affecting societal change. I am all these different things. She said, I am black, I'm lesbian, I'm a mother, and those are all aspects of my identity that I value and that somehow have to come into the picture. So many people think that if you want to be good to others, that it means that you should basically let your own demands, your own needs go. But that is not right. You know, you have Susan Wolf's famous paper on the moral saint. The moral saint is boring because she does everything to be good, but she isn't a person anymore. Like, you've been to funerals and wake, and often one thing that we really appreciate in people is things like, he was a great Cardinals fan, right? Now, how does this benefit us? He was a great Cardinals fan. Or he loved fishing. Fishing is something that you just do on your own. And being a sports fan, like, what is the point of that? And yet we remember fondly these things, these quirks. And so I've had this idea for a long time that basically you can be an ethical egoist. It's not a position that's popular in philosophy. But I think it works. Ethical egoism is that you basically make yourself flourish. You try to be the best person that you can be, and you nurture those aspects of yourself. And indeed, as you say, those aspects are often aspects that other people matter too. But what you don't want to do is just neglect yourself. So that's why I sort of call myself an ethical egoist. Because I have never sacrificed myself. Like, I'm a mother, I have 2 kids, but I don't sacrifice myself for them. I think that the best mother I can be is somebody who has a good career, and I've never compromised on that, and be there for them when I'm there. And I think that if many people saw that trying to do good does not mean that you have to sell yourself short, that the world would be a better place. That's what I think. So Audre Lorde should be more like her.
I appreciate that so much because a person can get caught up in this sort of striving. And I think especially within academia, this idea of always doing what's next and sacrificing one's life. But in a way, there's no option to just be a perfect being and not be also a human, you know, also ourselves. And so to embrace and accept that and focus on yourself without giving that away in the striving and the creativity, I like that idea a lot.
Yeah, I think that we should let go of the idea of perfection. So for a long time, I thought I should have papers in the top 5, philosophical review and whatnot. And I would send papers there and I would get no comments back after 3 months and saying, sorry, we can't publish everything, but in the interest of speed, we can't give comments to everybody. So here after 4 months is your paper. And then after a while, I thought, like, I can try to write about the epistemological significance of, I don't know, some speckled hens and... But I thought, no, some people write wonderful stuff about speckled hens and some people write wonderful things about all sorts of things that I don't care about. But I thought, why should I add to that? Nobody's going to read it. You have people who have such a CV full of these top journals, top topics. But I thought, I want to do just the stuff that I feel plays to my strengths. And it's a pity that the philosophy job market is so horrible. Because I think many people would want to do that, but they feel forced to, as you said, Kelly, do one thing and then the other thing, and then sort of get into this train. They have to do this and have to do that, and then I get tenure. And, you know, eventually you wonder, like, is this what I wanted to spend my time on?
I think maybe we've established here that hell is peer review. When you work on something and you send it out and it comes to nothing and there's no one on the other end who acknowledges.
No, it's just silence. Yeah, but I feel like if I can really help people to think like I can do a little bit of that, I don't have to like be in a joyless thing. Because why did you want to do philosophy? Like you always have to go back to the source of why did you want to do this in the first place? And in the end, your motivations can get poisoned because of social and external things. And of course, yeah, you have to pay your bills and that sort of thing. But it's always possible to at least devote some time to just to what matters to you.
We don't have eternity for that, so
No.
good to find the time.
Yeah.
So as we near the end of our time together, Helen, is there anything you'd like to promote or recommend, or anything that we can celebrate with you?
I don't know. My book Wonderstruck really did well. I was in the middle of basically, I was beginning to write another book, and I even had a contract, can you imagine, with a big 5 publisher for it. And then I got ill. And it's really such a big regret, but you can't just always be regretful and just celebrate what you could have done. And Wonderstruck, I'm really so grateful to my editor at Princeton to help me to craft it for a non-specialist audience. And I get letters weekly of people who enjoy it. So I'm very proud, very happy that I could do that. You can find it on Amazon and everywhere. And yeah, I'm proud of it.
Wonderful. We'll put links in our show notes for our listeners.
And our last question for today, tell us, what is your perfect reading spot?
My perfect reading spot is just basically, I like reading at home. I don't know, I'm a homebody, I guess. Just love to spend just some hours. And it's nice also to just read something completely non-philosophical as well, right? So just reading for pleasure, it's important.
Yeah, it's heavenly. Thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you, Chelsea. It was great to talk to you.
Yeah, really great to hear from you. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
That's it for today. Thanks for listening, story lovers, and tune in next time for a brand new story.
This episode was produced by Chelsea Haramia and Kelly Weirich. It was edited by Kelly Weirich with original music by the inimitable Hain Maung. You can find us at Buzzsprout, Spotify, or anywhere you find podcasts. Like and subscribe to add a little intrinsic value to the world.
Have you written a story that you think is perfect for Storyfi? Send it to Chelsea and Kelly at storyfipodcast@gmail.com.